Welcome to the True Knowledge Podcast Show with Atticus. True Knowledge is a podcast interviewing the most interesting experts in the world. Without further ado, here is your host.
Today we'll have Dr. Bollinger, a professor at UNCW Wilmington with 20 years of teaching and research experiences in the field of communication studies. He is in the business of persuasion. Today we're going to talk about conspiracy theories. Welcome to the show.
How you doing, Atticus?
Good, I'm doing well.
Good.
I want to jump right into aliens.
Okay.
Aliens.
Let me ask them first if it's okay if I can talk about them. Yeah, they said it's okay.
Okay. What are some top theories? Like, what are some really convincing evidence that people have?
Okay. Well, to give you the quick framework background-wise about this topic, in the research that I do and the different kind of stuff that I read almost every day, pretty much every day, about 95% of it is not well supported. It's a lot of conjecture. It's a lot of bad information that's poorly constructed. Whoever writes it doesn't have a lot of credibility. Their evidence is real flimsy, if they have any at all. The sources they quote are, can't be named. They have to be anonymous because they're afraid somebody will come after them and stuff like that. But then there's that 5%. And the 5%, those are those gems. Those are the ones that I hang on to. And I think the most credible things I've read about and seen about with aliens, and aliens in particular, and UFOs, because I relate those two together, are from very credible individuals like astronauts. For example, several of the United States astronauts that went on various missions, from the Mercury missions that orbited the Earth, and then Apollo that orbits the moon and then lands on the moon and comes back, and so forth, have reported a lot of interesting phenomena, and they've been very clear about it, that they were not alone.
Wait, can you give me more details about that?
Sure. Yeah. Specifically, let's see, I think it was Apollo 14, and I think that was Dr. Edgar Mitchell's mission. Now, you have to understand, in terms of credibility, Edgar Mitchell was a PhD and an MD. Highly trained specialist astronaut. They don't let just anybody go into space. You've got to go through this rigorous training, this mental profiling, all these tests. And he comes back and he basically says that the quotes were, "They're watching us now. They're with us. We're being watched." Okay, and this is well known in the community of people who follow this kind of stuff, and they cite that a lot. That let's see, Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, said something similar. And
is this in recording form or in their memos?
Yeah, in the actual recording, and then in some of the tapes that came back, they go to code when they're talking. So they in later moon missions, they came up with different codes to say, "Oh, look at that, blue star over there. That was a code for, okay, there's a UFO over there," So as far as they're concerned, these are astronauts and they're coming back and they're saying, yeah, okay. Now, did they see any of the occupants of these things? I don't know. It doesn't sound like it to me. But when those guys are coming out and saying things, I'm like, okay, that's interesting, because they have a lot to lose.
Yes.
Their reputations. They have a lot. And the other interesting thing is that NASA and the front for the official, side of things, to my knowledge, has never come forward and said, "Oh, all these astronauts are crazy." They've never done that. They just kind of, go like this. So there's that, and I think that's credible. There's this woman her name was Dr. Carla Turner, and she wrote a couple of books that are very compelling to read, even though she really has a hard time proving and providing evidence for her experiences. But the reason that she gets cited so much in the abduction theory side of aliens is that she was a PhD. Her family was well educated, and they were abducted, according to her stories, over a series of years. And she ended up getting a cancer and passing away. And she wrote very extensive stuff, and she risked her reputation. She came forward and said, "I'm a real person. This really did happen to me." Now, of course, I know psychiatrists and psychologists come forward and they try to talk about things like mass hallucination and hysteria and stuff like that. But there are many, 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 many stories about that kind of stuff. Okay, and some are more compelling than others. So there's that.
Are there any similar commonalities between the stories that are very true over time?
Yeah, I think the credibility of the person's first. Never gets eroded. Edgar Mitchell's credibility, he just passed away about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. His credibility was never eroded. Okay. People were like, he was kind of a marker where people would say, well, this person over here, we're not sure if they're, really, if they're not crazy or something, but here's Dr. Edgar Mitchell who's saying, yeah, they're there. Okay. And then you have other people's direct experiences that they talk about, and then there are people that you meet, that I have met, that they've realized that it's a complete utter waste of time for them to try to explain their experiences and try to report anything. They just are very matter of fact about it. Yeah, this happened to me, and well, why didn't you say something? I said, well, who's going to believe me anyway? So I just kind of chalk it up to, yeah, I ran into this. And it was, everything happened and it was real, and I know it was, and, I just kind of keep it to myself. There are people like that too. But people associate the sighting, of a craft with the actual occupants. And I think there's a potential disconnect there. And here's what I mean by that. The United States military, and I know this from people I know in the military, like Lieutenant Colonel John Church and Major Crawford Parrish and some other people. He was the guy in the Air Force I mentioned, who are very matter of fact at saying that technology in the military is, our consumer technology, for example, what they have is 60 to 100 years ahead of anything we've got in consumer technology. Just think about that. Flat screen, thin TVs, they had in the 60s. They were plasma. They weren't LCD yet, but they were plasma, flat screens, high def, all that kind of stuff. They had that for a long time before it got into consumer level. Okay, so it'd be very interesting to see what they have now.
Right.
But the point of that is that I had read about various crafts that had been spotted by people. I'd never seen anything myself, but I was kind of familiar with what they were looking at. And a lot of credible folks, including those guys, were seemed to be implying that there was a lot of interesting technology out there, whether or not it was reverse engineered from something else or somewhere else, I don't know. But for example, anti-gravity, okay, and that kind of propulsion system, which you see evidence of in the U.S. Navy videos that were released a couple of years ago, and now the government, right now, today, there's a lot of chatter today, literally today on the internet about how there's a kind of a mainstreaming that looks like is happening with all this. It's like, are we getting set up, for, okay, folks, here comes the big news. I don't know. This happened to me, though. January 21st, 2017. It was 6:30 in the evening, kind of dusky, right around dusk. And I was driving in my car. It had a sunroof in it. I was coming back. It was a Sunday. And I was coming back from acting in a show here in town. And it was the last show of the run. So we'd stayed around a little bit later because we did a matinee. And so we stayed a little bit later and then said goodbye to everybody in the cast. And I'm driving home now. I live out in the county, out in Pender County. and I take all these nice quiet back roads, and I kind of decompress, listen to the radio or something like that. And I come around this curve, and I've been on this road a million times. And I looked up, and I saw in between trees, and you know how a power line will go across a road, and then they have to cut a hole through the trees for the power line to go. So there's this opening, right there. And I looked up, and I saw the triangle shape, one of the classic UFO designs with the 3 lights in the corner and 1 light in the middle. And it did this rotation. It just kind of rotated down, and I just went, "Oh, that's interesting." And I didn't, because I thought, okay, it's a TR-3B. That's what in the UFO circles they call it. That's the military designation. It's an experimental United States aircraft that some people mistake for being, like alien stuff. So it rotated down, and I paralleled it, and it kind of paralleled me, and I slowed down to about 25, and it was just kind of cruising along, and my windows were down. It wasn't cold. It didn't make any noise at all. It was really quiet, and I tried to do a triangulation, and I couldn't stop, and I wasn't going to take out my phone and take a picture. I was just kind of watching it, and it paralleled me, and then it came to a stop, and it's just kind of a slow stop. And so I slowed down too, and I almost came to a stop, and then it started to back away and kind of go away, and it was gone. I couldn't see it again. My estimation, it was about 100 feet. The side that I showed that was facing me looked like it was 100 feet, and it had this kind of glowing set of panels on it, sort of a light blue, light purple color. And I was like, wow, that was really interesting. It was fascinating. Later that semester, I had a student who, her husband's dad is a Marine colonel up at Lejeune. In the Marine Corps, if you're family of the officers, you have your own private beach. So the officers have their own beach for their families. It's this private beach. So she and her husband go to this beach one day. And they come out, and nobody's supposed to be there, usually. And she comes out, and she sees what is clearly someone who's an officer with these 2 regular Marines. And they're working on this thing that she said it looked like a motorcycle, kind of a sled motorcycle thing, but it was hovering. It wasn't touching the ground, and it moved. And they were kind of adjusting it and stuff like that, and so it wasn't touching the ground, And it was clearly seemed to be hovering on its own somehow, and not making any noise. And the officer yelled at them and said, "You're not supposed to be here. Get out of here." Well, this is the family. You're not supposed to be here. Leave now. So they did. So these little kind of pieces of information come out. I'm not sure what I saw, but other than I know what I saw. And my personal opinion is it's probably something military. So which means we've got stuff that, if we actually got into a real situation with another country or something else or whatever, I assume they would have that to fall back to. But I have no idea.
It's like the next evolution of like Manhattan Project.
Well, yeah, exactly. And then there's all the countless numbers of videos that are out there of phenomena that a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to debunk, and a lot of them are kind of, but when the U.S. Navy releases footage, and these trained fighter pilots are going, man, look at that, and I think that there's something to this.
What exactly were the footage that was released?
Well, in a jet fighter, you've got these cameras that they use, and they're recording what they're seeing. These cameras are seeing, of course, with their flight guidance systems and their weapon systems. So if there's something that you want to target, and your guidance system locks onto it, then the camera comes on, and it will not let it go unless you lose contact with it somehow. So that's what you see is you see these things that are flying, and they're doing things that normal planes just can't do. And there's all the narrative evidence, the stories and things that people tell. But those are just, and those are interesting, and they can be compelling, but that's not enough evidence for me. and I've heard people, tell stories about meeting them and all that kind of, and you read some of the stuff that I've read, and there's a whole kind of, there's like just all kinds that are here. They've been around forever. They hold different forms, that kind of thing, and all within the realm of any kind of possibility. Especially when I think about like quantum physics and the stuff I mentioned during our pre-interview. I just intellectually, I will entertain the possibility of anything. So I will. I don't have like, for example, I don't have a religious inclination to fear that kind of information. And on that point, back when Pope Benedict was still the Pope before he resigned, and the new one came in, and of course, what was his real name? He was German. Ratzinger. That was his real name. Ratzinger. Pope Ratzinger. The Vatican has the Roman Catholics have in the Vatican an office of kind of science information, and they basically acknowledged. They released a statement saying, and I'm paraphrasing it like crazy, but they certainly think that the possibility of alien life is real, and they would treat them as brothers if they were to be here. And my takeaway was, and they can be Catholic too. So, so let's say you're from another star system. And by the way, you can be Catholic, so I always thought that was kind of funny. But it's such interesting that kind of organization that's been around as long as it has, and there purportedly has lots of secret information about this kind of stuff. But again, none of that's verified, is stepping forward and basically acknowledging, my takeaway from all this is like, okay, everybody, just kind of get it in your head that this could be a real thing. And a lot of people who are so-called ufologists, and a lot of people who are disclosure advocates, and meaning the truth has to come out and all that kind of stuff. A lot of those people over the years, I think, some of them have been dishonest. They've cashed in. They've manipulated things rhetorically, especially on the emotional level. And they've made a lot of money, and they cash in on this kind of stuff. So that is that gets in the way, and that doesn't help things if people are really serious about this. But as I've entertained the question with you before, has all this desensitization been going on for decades with movies and television, and this idea of this possibility of them being around, and then what do we do if it's like, okay, here they are, and I think like you, I would go like, okay, that's cool, as long as they, what do they want,
right?
There was in the article I got today, I was about to read it before I had to come here. That I get in the mail, and I think it comes every other day. Futurism, I think it's called Futurism is the name of it. And I get a set of articles, about stuff. And it's usually, about technology and AI and things like that. But the bottom article is with all this movement towards disclosure and the government and everything. The writer is speculating. I just saw the headline. The writer is speculating: is religion going to be replaced by, or is the next savior going to be, from out there? Because there's a sense that humanity right now is moving towards a precipice, and we're in trouble due to things like climate change and stuff like that. And of course, that's speculative, but it's interesting because it contributes to the atmosphere of what's going on. But as far as the most credible stuff, I mean, if I were, an alien, I would definitely not let humans know that what I really was.
Why?
Because I think human beings are some of the most dangerous creatures ever. We're capable of beauty. We're capable of horror. In my rhetoric class, on the first day of class, I say, okay, Atticus, you're a nice guy, aren't you? And Atticus, you say, no, because you have self-serving bias. You look in the mirror, Atticus, you'll look in the mirror and go like, Yeah, I'm a nice guy. Yeah, my hair's working today.
I'm really big on this idea that.
Well, wait, you got to let me finish.
Okay.
So what I tell them is, okay, we're all nice people. We generally think that we're nice people. We're reasonable, kind, and all those things. Well, Adolf Hitler was able to take people like you and me, nice people, and turn us into monsters.
Yes.
How was he able to do that? Through rhetoric and message manipulation. Granted, there were some other factors that were in place that contributed, but ultimately, nice, reasonable people were suddenly convinced that their neighbors were rats and had to be treated as such. So there's a danger there. So that's why I say humans are dangerous. We're capable of boundless beauty and boundless horrors,
How easy it is to influence, right? Because I feel like essentially we're in the business of persuasion. How easy it is to persuade someone to do horrible things?
I've never done that before, so I couldn't tell you. I'd be scared to try, I can tell you that. I think that if I were, a socio-psychopath, those people, the accounts I've read, they're extremely brilliant people. You can't really tell what they're doing and what they're up to. And a weaker person is, they, as a predator, because they're predators, and they find the weaker individuals, in the herd, if you will, and those are the ones they go after to try to manipulate. Now there's that. But then there's back to conspiracy theory, to turn people into monsters and machines, was the MK Ultra program run by the United States government, which is a real thing. It really did happen. The United States government said it happened, and then in the Senate hearings in 1973, they said, we don't do it anymore. Now, I'm not buying that for a second, because I know that if you have a military or intelligence advantage over somebody else, and you have something that it may be unethical, it may be unwieldy, but you get results with it, you're never going to get rid of it. You're not going to get rid of it. So for publicity purposes, they said, we don't do this anymore. I don't buy that for a second. And that is an intentional manipulation, and it does involve persuasion, but it also involves things like high doses of LSD and other types of things that are done to people.
Or they try to achieve like field sensing.
Yeah, I mean these assassinations that have happened over the years in American history, not only do they lend themselves to your imagination, but then when you really start thinking about it, there are a lot of unanswered questions. Case in point, Robert Kennedy, 1968. Sirhan gets the blame for it. He's still alive. I was at a lunch a few years ago, we were getting sushi with my wife and a bunch of her friends, and there was this woman I sat next to who was with the group, and I said hello, and I didn't know her. We start talking. She's a psychiatrist. She works at that hospital in California where Sirhan is, and at that time, so was Charles Manson. He was still alive then. So I said, Sirhan, okay, I'm a conspiracy guy. Can I ask you some questions? She said, you can ask me anything you want, but I'm not going to tell you anything. And so I tried, and I just let her know. I said, none of this stuff adds up. There's a lot of holes in that, and that's why, as a conspiracy theory, it's still around. Conspiracy theories stick around because there's a sense that there's inadequate answering, to the general public's questions. One of my theories about all this is, even if, let's say, you're an authority figure and you say, yep, we figured it all out, and this is really what happened, and 9/11 happened because of this, and here are these people that were involved, and we've arrested all these people, and we have all this evidence, and we're gonna rectify this whole thing. There's still gonna be people that won't believe it.
Let's talk about 9/11.
9/11, okay.
Yes. Right. Well, I want to go more about this. So it seems like with the aliens and such, right? So eventually, with technology, with social media, eventually they'll form certain groups, right? Because you'll something things happen to you and no one believes you. After a while, right? Maybe you'll start connected with someone else that also has
Absolutely.
similar experience.
Absolutely.
And start forming groups or things like that.
Yeah.
What do you think is something that makes a group more credible than others, and what are some aspects that makes a group less credible?
On like Facebook, social media?
Because you mentioned about people would start cashing out on it, right? So that would take away credibility from the cause or the belief and stuff like that.
Well, I'm not a social psychologist, but I do agree with the observation of one guy who was doing research on why people like conspiracy theories so much. And, these are individuals. We all are social creatures, and we want to be part of things, whatever that is. And a lot of research has shown that if we're alone, that's really bad for us, over time. So that's the first thing. We want to be part of something. Now I think, Atticus, you and I probably have fairly interesting lives, and we're intellectually active and so forth. So our lives are kind of, they're interesting, and so we're not looking for something to fill in the gap because our life sucks. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's a lot of people that, for whatever reason, are in a place they don't want to be, but they don't want to do anything to change it, and they get worn down over time. By time, they get caught into the rut or whatever you want to call it, and the next thing you know, you got social media that just uses up the rest of their time. I think Westerners are really, really good at wasting a lot of time, as opposed to maximizing as much time as you can during the day. I'm certainly guilty of that myself sometimes. But people who want to be part of groups like that QAnon White Rabbit group I showed you on Facebook, I think about half of the people actually use their real Facebook profiles, and half of them don't.
What are they afraid of?
Well, they don't want to have their realities that they've been creating with each other. By the way, that reality happens through communication and discourse, right? They're creating social realities with each other in their minds. They become so identified with that. Imagine if things are proven true, and then that creates that cognitive dissonance, right? I think, and I noted yesterday when I looked at it, the last time I had seen it, they had 70,000 some followers. Now they had 54,000. And here's what's going on. These people are coming forward trying to make these big predictions, about Trump and everything. And none of these predictions are coming true. And people who are rational, reasonable people, who are willing to, okay, well, make your case. And they don't make their case, they're not following that group anymore, But there's still 54,000 people, including me, because I'm watching it, who think it's credible. And then there are the individuals that are deep within there that in my opinion, and I have a friend that I grew up with there, and I know she has some serious issues, that's all she does all freaking day. And part of the reason she can do it is that she was from a wealthy family, and she inherited a lot of money, so she doesn't have to work anyway. You see, so I think there's a lot of in some people's mind there's a lot of change and this sort of feeling that they've lost control somehow. And I'm not really sure what that's about, because I don't feel that way at all. As a matter of fact, I'm very excited about this present moment. I think it's fascinating, and I'm generally an optimist, although I'm aware of the negative outcomes that are possible out there. So I pay attention to those things, but there are a lot of people's lives suck, man. And I don't know if it's economic. I don't know if they just made poor life choices. For example, I do some acting on the side, and I hang around these people, and they're artists, and some of them are very sensible people too, as well as being artists. Some of them are not sensible, but are good artists, but they suck at managing life. You see what I'm saying? And I think there's a parallel to that with some of these people who want to be in these groups, is that they suck at managing their life.
Interesting.
And I'm not sure why that happens, if that was a family thing, but for however you want to call it, they're not good at just relationships with people, building normal relationships, and with your coworkers, and creating relationships that are not just ritualized but are meaningful. And you're open to the concept of things like love and the different kinds of aspects of love. I think some people have just walked. I don't know what's happened, but they walk away from it, and so there's a void. And then, let's say I have bad intentions, or I really don't care about people. I just want to make a lot of money, so I invent something on a conspiracy theory level, and do it in such a way that's very effective, manipulative, and so forth. Really has a lot of pop to it, a lot of zing, a lot of excitement. I tap into fear, anger.
Makes them feel like they're in the in group.
Yeah, and I say, look, hey, you want to hear? This is what's really going on with the Freemasons or something like that. They just come on in, like you were talking about with cliques and stuff like that. They they identify themselves, and then they go to these different websites that they're doing quote unquote conspiracy research, and then all the stuff just comes in after them, and it's like that. I'm not really sure why, what it is about the internet, but it's a very interesting thing, the effect of the internet, because when I was in high school, the internet existed, but it was strictly a military application and a university research application. And where I went to high school in Durham, North Carolina, we had a direct link to the Research Triangle Park mainframe computers. That was, Duke University, UNC Chapel Hill, and North Carolina State, and we're in this hub. So we were in this unusual place where we got exposed to the internet, but it was still not a regular thing for everybody. It's my understanding the internet was originally designed as a fallback for communication after a nuclear war, where they set off the EMP, the electromagnetic pulse in the atmosphere. First round, here we are going to nuclear attacks for some reason. The first thing that happens in a nuclear attack is they set one of the nukes up in the atmosphere, and it just shuts everything electronic down. And so the internet is there as a series of phone lines that would be able to withstand that, and communications could continue. And then, and now it's, of course, we know what it is. But I think a lot of people thought that you would have a computer and you would have it linked to the internet, and then you would use it as a tool, or maybe game a little bit, but that's as far as it would go. And that's not what happened. And I don't think people who were into technology at that time were really aware of the potential of rhetorical manipulation, the creation of conspiracy theory, to the point where you convince somebody. And this was my presentation at the conference I went to this past week. You could convince a person that in this pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., is a satanic pedophile ring, and there are children that are being held in there. And this guy from North Carolina gets in his car and he drives up there with like an AR-15 rifle and some handguns, and busts in there thinking he's going to rescue all these children that are being harmed. And there are no children there. It's just a pizza place. That's all it was. That's all it ever was. And now he's serving 4 years in federal prison because, he went in there and shot the place up. He didn't hit anybody. And imagine how he feels now. I wonder what he's thinking.
Do you think he still believes that?
I thought I read something to the fact that he realizes now that he would have been had, basically, and he feels stupid about it. And he's glad he didn't hurt anybody, but he's got some more time to think about it. And see, that's the thing about conspiracy theory, is when you shine the light on it in a particular way, and we have this whole freedom of speech thing, right? But they figured out a way to take freedom of speech, and somehow you can say basically almost anything, and there's no accountability. And now there's a movement towards that. Alex Jones on his InfoWars show, he kept pushing a lot of conspiracy theories like the Sandy Hook Massacre. The Sandy Hook Massacre, he said, was a false flag operation that the Obama administration staged to justify the government coming in and taking your guns from you because, we can't handle guns. And that was his thing. And then he went further with it, where he claimed that none of the children actually died, and so forth. And then people who bought into his what he said then would find where these parents lived and start harassing them and threatening them and stuff like that. They got together with some lawyers. They filed a suit because they can prove harm,
Yes.
and they filed a suit. And now he's in court, and he's probably going to lose because the burden of proof on him is just, okay, you're saying the aliens are here and they're controlling, they're doing this, that, and the other. We're in court now. Prove it. And he can't, right? So this is what shuts down conspiracy theory people like them, is putting them on the spot, putting them in a situation where if they can't prove it, there are going to be serious legal consequences, mainly monetary ones in this case. That's how you try to nip this stuff in the bud. Oh, well, not in the bud, but just try to prevent it from doing more harm, really.
To show that's not profitable, essentially.
Yeah, well, it's certainly not profitable, but the idea of law and the rule of law is a real thing, and there are consequences if somebody comes up with a conspiracy theory and they want to manipulate people, and you want to make a buck. You could come up with a conspiracy theory and make it kind of like a live action role play, and get people involved and excited about it.
Get their attention.
Yeah, and make money, and as long as you go cross certain lines, I think in a way normal business does that. You create a need in the mind of your target audience, right? And you want them to buy whatever it is you're selling. And then you figure out ways to do it rhetorically using social media or whatever, and then they think about it and they're like, yeah, that's right. I do need to get an education. I think I'll go to UNCW because we do it here.
Right. A compelling enough story.
Yeah,
Target an insecurity.
Yeah, UNCW. I've been here 22 years, right? And one of my beefs I've always had with them is, we're working on diversity, right? We're working on it.
I hope you have tenure.
Yeah. So, whatever. We're working on it. But, these minority students of mine have this joke where, the photographer will call them up and say, hey, you're not white. Can you come over here and pose in front of the library? And we're going to take these pictures and we're going to put them on the regular rotating set of pictures of the homepage, and just say, wow, look how diverse we are. And we have gotten a lot more diverse. I've been here long enough, believe me. I think one of the coolest things about here and I would argue that kind of advertising and that kind of
propaganda
is and propaganda is useful and it's working, because when I was doing research at Duke back in 2008, one of the things I really, really liked about being on Duke campus was I would walk through one of these libraries or across campus, and there would be these clusters of people, and they were all speaking different languages. They were from all over the world. I was like, wow, that is so cool. I'm starting to hear that here at UNCW. I'm starting to go, what? That sounds like Japanese, like, what? Oh man, that sounds like German or something, and
right.
And that's a good sign, so you want to call it propaganda, you want to call it advertising, you want to call it marketing, whatever. It's still the same effect, but we're making a choice as the sender of the message, and then as the consumer of the message. If you decide, well, I don't want to go to UNCW. There's no harm, no foul. But if you really want to go to UNCW and you've had an inclination towards it already and all the things that we can do to try to get you to apply, then that's great. As opposed to this conspiracy here, you should be really angry about, and we're going to tell you that Hillary Clinton is this evil thing, and they're calling Joe Biden now an evil guy. They put up a picture. I saw this yesterday of Joe Biden, and you know who he is, right? Okay, yeah. Cool. And there's this picture of Joe Biden, and he gets singled out and made fun of because he's a touchy-feely kind of guy, you know, yes. And this kind of thing. And so there's this picture of him, and he's he's behind this little boy, and he's got his arm around him, and he's got him by his chin, and he's kind of leaning him up, and you can tell he's talking to him like that and kind of forcing the kid's head up. Well, if you look at the context of the picture, they're at a funeral, and he was telling the kid to be quiet. It was like his, I think, grandson or grand something, one of his family members. And this is kid, and you grab hold of the kid, and you say, "You really need to stop talking." "Okay, I'm really sorry." Okay. I mean, as a grandparent or a parent, you can do that, right. You know. So they take these things and manipulate them in social media context, and they slap them up on that QAnon site I showed you. Every once in a while, they'll take articles. It's like they have nothing to get jacked up about or get angry about. So somebody will put up an article that's like 7 years old and says, "Look at this, Obama did this." And I'm like, and I'll actually say something. "You guys, this is 7 years old. This is ancient history. It has nothing to do with what's going on now. Why are you putting this stuff up?" And most of the time, there are a couple of people that will say, thank you for pointing that out. You know, and then there's some people that says, "It doesn't matter. He still did it because we hate Obama."
So for this group, do they typically kick you out if you're too vocal against them?
I guess if you, I've seen some people like go, "I'm sorry, you guys." Actually, they kick themselves out. Yeah, which I think actually makes more sense because they realize there's somebody that I've tracked a couple of times, and the QAnon conspiracy group puts out these little communiques saying that, okay, you know, Obama and Hillary are going to be arrested today, and they're going to be put on a military tribunal and then executed by tomorrow afternoon or something crazy like that. And all these people go, "Yeah," you know, and then this one person. You know, then the next day comes, and this one person says, "Hey, you know, that never happened. Don't you guys kind of wonder about this Q thing?" And, you know, and then other people who are also reasonable, who are kind of lurkers, will chime in finally and say, "You know what, you're right. I think I'm out of here. I think these people are nuts. And this whole Q thing is just, you know, nuts." And they figure it out and they leave. The people that stay, I don't know what's going on. I mean, I know about a couple of them, and they're crazy. You know, I personally enjoy reading about speculative alternative histories. The reason I think it's fascinating is that, and I'm not a geologist or anything, but based on my observations and the things that I've read and some very reputable scientific research that has been done and, you know, written about, you know, my basic theory is this planet that we live on is a living thing, and it's capable of taking a civilization and you know, that civilization can be absorbed and disappear over time. You know, whatever, if you want to call it a disaster or a plague, or, you know, or they just leave, you know, or for some reason because the resources run out, you know, and that kind of stuff. So, and out of that come stories, and, you know, we're narrative storytelling creatures, human beings, and we enjoy that. And you know, imagine a period of time where you were not literate. The only way you had a sense of identity in history was through storytelling. It was through the oral and oral mediums. And that's it. That's all you had. And so they were really good at that. If you go back and study some of the Aboriginal histories and traditions and stories in Australia, you know, granted, they've written a lot of stuff down now, but I mean, they still go back to the elders and the shamans who have the historical and spiritual knowledge, the ancient knowledge. Right. So I think there's a sense in a lot of us that we have an older set of knowledge that we have been denied access to for some period of time, and exactly how that is expressed. Some people have said it's on some genetic level that we have memories. We have a some people have a predisposition to fear certain things, like snakes, okay, and or whatever, and that fear. Some people say it's cognitive schemata and stuff like that, and things that you've learned, and then there are other people that and there's some serious research on it, that within our genetic code, because it's an old code, it goes way back. I mean, many generations. Out of that code, could there possibly be some kind of trigger for a desire for older knowledge? For example, so I have a particular interest in reading like the Hancock books and stuff like that, just out of sheer fascination and to speculate, if you've ever read Kuhn's book, The Theory of Scientific Revolutions, have you ever read that? Little skinny book. One of the first things they had us read in grad school. And he talks about how established theories, whatever they are, whether it's in science or economics or communication studies or whatever, established theories are, and the orthodoxy gets really angry and very defensive when new theories come along and threaten its status, its stature within the discipline, whatever the discipline is. And I think that to some degree, some of the better constructed and more researched conspiracy stuff does that. It threatens the status quo. I'll have students in my class, I'll say, you got to pick a conspiracy theory to do your research on, right? Your job is to not try to find out whether you think it's true or not. Your job is to do a critical analysis of its content, and how well or how poorly do they convey their messages. That's what we do. And so some students will come up and say, well, I want to do something on like Atlantis. I think Atlantis is really cool, but it's not really a conspiracy, is it? And I said, yeah, it's more like a historical phenomena. But you know what you could do with Atlantis is research it from the angle of where people who like Orthodox history don't want to have that possibility introduced in the canons of truth, if you will. Okay, so in other words, I wrote a history book, and it's all about what happened about whatever, and then somebody comes along and introduces an alternative explanation and refutes my history book that I've had for 500 years or whatever. I've got a lot at stake. I'm going to fight that. I'm going to prevent you from getting that alternative history out. You got your conspiracy, because that's you conspire to try to prevent somebody from publishing something that would affect your, for example, livelihood or income. This happens a lot. I mean, out of that, historical conspiracy theories, happen. The other thing about most of the conspiracy stuff that I've researched, like, aliens and everything, that they go back historically thousands of years. I mean, thousands of years. And accounts of indigenous peoples all around the world, accounts of the things that have happened in China, things that have happened in various parts of Asia and the Americas, and recollections of people. Of course, how are they recorded? Hieroglyphically or through storytelling or whatever you want to call it. And I think one of the mistakes that some historians have made is the assumption that human beings, 10,000 years ago, whatever, we're kind of naive and we're a little slow of wit, and so when we saw something, we took it very literally, and all that kind of thing. And I think there's something to be said about at least entertaining, just intellectually, some of the ideas that people like Hancock talk about. I mentioned the Hapgood book, written in 1958 with the foreword by Albert Einstein on not just plate tectonics, but entire continental shifts. I mean, the entire continent moves in one piece over a fairly short period of time and changes the dynamic of the planet literally overnight. And in his book, I think he makes references to some of the ancient recollections of disasters in different cultures that are a couple thousand years old, that when they describe things like, and the stars fell from the sky, and the mountains shook and then disappeared. The stars fell from the sky. You know, that's a quote. It's certainly, you know, it's in biblical stuff, but it's in other stuff too. The stars fell from the sky. Well, let's say you're looking at the stars and the continent you're on moves very quickly in one direction. It'll look like the stars fell.
Wow.
From your point of view.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, those kinds of forces that are in play, something that you would call a mountain might very well, it's gone. And the disaster on that level, where the entire continents, shift like that, and they flip, and relocate and stuff like that. There are more people that are willing to consider that. And Hapgood, he was taken very seriously as a scientist. I mean, if Albert Einstein's good enough for him, then Albert's like, hey, you guys ought to check this out. There might be something here. It looks very compelling to me. So that helps your credibility.
What are some good ways or indicators to really filter out, or how should we look at conspiracy theories to filter out?
Well, let's say you have a friend who's all into this.
Yeah.
Right? Let's say you have a friend that's like, Atticus, man, I got this conspiracy for you will not believe this. And you're like, okay, great. All right, Dave, let me hear it. Okay, you got to make it clear to your friend that the burden of proof is on him. Okay? If you've got somebody that's going to say, here's a conspiracy, I'm like, okay, I'll listen to you, but the burden of proof's on you, and you better have some very compelling evidence that makes it very clear to me. Otherwise, you're just, kind of talking out of your butt. You know what I'm saying? And you have to establish your credibility with me. If you can't establish your credibility with me, you got to tell me who your sources are. And they better be real people. And I'm inclined towards people who are educated. So if they've got a PhD and they're a real person and I can actually reach them by email, that'll help. And then the other thing is, yeah, but it's all spooky and scary and you should be scared or you should be mad or whatever. And the whole emotional pathos thing starts happening. You stop them and you say, I'm sorry, all you're doing is trying to manipulate me on an emotional level. And you're not providing evidence. You don't have any credible sources. You don't have any. All you're doing is like, boo, scary, boo. And that's how you see through it, and you don't need to be an expert at spotting all these alternative news websites that are out there that are saying various kinds of things. You don't have to be an expert because they have to do the same thing in terms of journalism. They have to cite sources. They have to provide evidence. They have to be credible. They have to write in such a way that the emotional manipulation is only as necessary as it needs to be. It's really not hard, unless you have a particular inclination to I just think UFOs are cool, and I think aliens are here, and I think it would be really cool if Men in Black were true. Then that's okay. I have no problem with that.
So that's before you even start, you have a set agenda. You're more likely.
Well, some people do. Some people, they saw Men in Black. And of course, they got the new movie coming out pretty soon, I guess now, or it's already out. And they have Men in Black. And the thing is, Men in Black comes from an old set of government conspiracy that goes back to the end of World War II. Yeah. So and they made it into a fun movie, with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. And, it's a great film. It's a lot of fun to watch. I love watching the movie. It's got legs. It's 20 years old. It still holds up. It's great. It's a good film. For that purpose of being entertained,
What's the old conspiracy?
Well, this is, some people say that the documents that they recovered from the government, from NASA and some other places, and the military through the Freedom of Information Act. So some people say that the government, whatever that is, provided fake, falsified, or changed documents for these people. But the story is that after World War II, that there was and then we had the Roswell incident and all this kind of stuff, that later President Eisenhower, and he was a two-term president, 52 to 60, and he, of course, led the U.S. forces, very credible guy, and a conservative guy, was finally compelled to meet with aliens at one of these Air Force bases. There was a Catholic priest that came with him and some other military guys, and they were going to negotiate with the quote-unquote alien for technology and all this kind of thing, and somehow the negotiations broke down. And right before that, that period of time, supposedly during the Truman era, right before Eisenhower came into power, there was this group that was created amongst military and intelligence officers. It was called the Majestic 12. It was MJ-12 is what they called it. And so you had Admiral Forrestal was in it. All these names that you see there. And a lot of military people that I've talked to that were sort of knowledgeable of it said there was something like that did exist, but it wasn't exactly called MJ-12. So that's how these stories kind of get going, and people go, "Look, this is a government document." Well, you don't know where we just don't know.
Yeah.
If that's an actual thing or not. And people who know what government documents are supposed to look like will look at something and go, that could be real. If you know what you're doing, that could be a forgery too. So the whole idea of proof, being in front of you, that's inescapable proof, it starts being eroded early, and during this recent era of your UFO alien stuff. In Rhetoric, there's Aristotle talked about the artistic proofs, ethos, pathos, logos, and he talked about inartistic proofs, and those are things that we all look at and agree to be true. But as I talked about, we take a picture with our phone, and you and I are out in the parking lot, and an alien dude walks up and says, "Hey, I heard your podcast. It was really good." And we go, "Well, great. Where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from Alpha Centauri. Can Atticus and I take a group photo?" And we do, and we post it, and none of our friends believe it, and all that kind of stuff, that because of cognitive dissonance. And I think that I think that's one of the huge problems we have now with the internet, with the social media, is that we can make anything out of we can make anything look like anything
Photoshop
and sound like
fakes.
anything.
Yeah.
And so as a general rule, and this was another article I read on the futurism thing I got today about the whole idea of the fake videos. Deepfakes, thank you. The deepfakes are really getting better and better and better and better and better until eventually, you're going to watch somebody.
Used by a political weapon.
Yeah, and if you're not an informed person, and for example, the presidential candidate has not come up with a way to say, okay, they need to put some kind of watermark on them. There's got to be something that says, okay, if you see this or you don't see that, then it's a deep fake. Don't listen to it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, they're going to have to come up with something. Yeah, and right now, as far as I know, there's not anything out there. But that's one of the big problems, where I have these people I know that are conspiracy theory nut jobs, bless their hearts. And Dave, I'm doing all this research, and I'm like, well, show me what you got. And I said, well, that could be anything. That could be, no, it's from the government, man. Look at it, it's an actual government document. I said, well, how do you know that? They don't, So I think that there's this kind of, this place where some people are at. And
you want to achieve a higher knowledge, right? Like from school.
Yeah. They're asking questions. I guess you could kind of turn it around or twist it around in such a way that you could say, well, you know what, maybe humanity is reaching a kind of a tipping point in terms of what are they going to consider what is real and what is not, and all these big, larger cosmic kind of questions. And if you read some of the esoteric stuff that's out there, some people said like 2012 we were gonna evolve into from a 3D to a 5D consciousness, and all that kind of stuff. I have a sister who's all into that, bless her heart. She's real cosmic.
Yeah.
And I said,
what do you see those things ties in with conspiracies? Right? Like I feel like there's a huge.
I think there's a connection in the need of some people to be part of some big change.
Mm.
And I think that some of these, the way that conspiracy theories have been presented, and some of them ridiculous and just poorly done, and I mean just come on, to that little 5% that's very compelling. I think that it can address at least from a Western consciousness level, this sort of notion that there's something coming. There's something coming. And I hear that a lot. I get that vibe from a lot of different people. They might be talking about conspiracy. They might be talking about, really esoteric spiritual stuff. But my takeaway is something is about to happen. Something is coming. Okay. And then they take that and they run with it, and then whatever you're going to do.
But they want it is. Do they have this desire that the something will be something that fundamentally changes their life?
Their life, I think, or on a maybe on a macro level somehow, But and I'm not a psychologist, but it sure seems to me like, I mean, if your life is boring and it sucks and you're feeling unfulfilled, you're kind of fodder, for some of these things. I mean, talk about conspiracies. Look at the Jim Jones suicide massacre in 1979. I mean, he was a master rhetorician in terms of his Christian rhetoric. And Christian rhetoric, the art of preaching is homiletics. He was really good at the art of preaching, to the point where he convinced 800 people to drink the Kool-Aid, and they did. That's. And this is not a new thing. This is new.
Can you go more in depth about the way they use the rhetorics, how to convince people? Like, are there certain steps they use or certain techniques that?
I think from what I can tell, if you're interested in messaging, just the basic steps of messaging. The basic steps of rhetoric have been around for a couple thousand years. It's not a secret. And so what we teach our students in our department is, how to use it. We have a big emphasis on being ethical, because then we talk about the consequences of not being ethical and using that kind of power. It's like I said, this is rhetoric right here. It's neutral. And you plug into it and you have power. Now, what do you do with the power? You have a drill in your hand, right? You can use it to build, or you can use it to torture somebody. You have to make a choice with how you're going to use it. It's the same kind of thing. So what we're doing is teaching stuff that's been around for thousands of years. There's no secret to it. You just have to. I guess I would start with the Greeks and how Plato argues about what rhetoric and rhetorical discourse is in relation especially to justice and the pursuit of justice, versus his opponents, they were called the group sophists. And they were people that were saying, well, rhetoric and communication is to be used for persuasion is nothing more than a dialectical collision. So they called it the dialectic, and Plato called it the dialogue. Okay, and they do intertwine sometimes, because what communication people and scholars think today is that we operate in a hybrid of those two approaches, the Platonic approach and the sophistic approach. The dark stuff comes from some of the sophists. Not all the sophists were. Some sophists were like, we have to be very ethical about this. But then there were some that were like, this is real power, and if people are that stupid and are that easily manipulated by what I can show you, and this again is like 2,500 years ago, then it's their fault, and go ahead and take advantage of them. Take their money. I mean, they were like that. They would tell their students that, and the students would come home from school and hang out with their Greek parents and start questioning things like, Aphrodite was the goddess of love, and so let's say that night, the Lee family's going to go to Aphrodite's temple for a big, event, and Atticus comes home after listening to Gorgias talk about, his skeptical philosophy and all that kind of stuff, and suddenly you realize, or in your mind you realize that all this is a social construction made through words. That's all it is. It's not. There's not a real goddess there. It's just a statue, And so you start talking to your parents, and your parents are like, Atticus, why aren't you dressed for Aphrodite's event tonight? And you're like 14, and you're going, Mom, there's no such thing as Aphrodite. It's just a thing in your head that somebody put in there. Who told you that? My teacher, It's a lot. It was like that. I mean, that's why Socrates got in trouble. They made him drink the hemlock because he stirred up all the kids. And all the kids are like going, that's not true. And your parents are like, stop. All right, who's the teacher? Let's kill him. So that's what they did. I mean, so if you wanted to learn about this, it's the information's been there for thousands of years.
So it seems like conspiracy is like really trying to align with the truth.
Well, I think for people who regularly participate in this stuff, and at the point where it's psychologically it's hurting them, okay, there's something else deeper that's going on, and I'm not really sure what it is. I couldn't tell you. I think for people,
but this is the 95%.
That's because they don't know how to make good arguments. Imagine if you were a trained rhetorician, and you knew how all these things worked, and you were in my case, I would be operating from what I hoped would be a high ethical model, because I'm concerned about before I engage in this rhetoric, I'm going to remind myself that I'm only doing this for the greater good. Okay, I'm not doing this for personal gain. Okay, that's what Plato would say. The sophists would say, you can engage in this, and if you want to do it for the greater good, that's fine. If you just want to make a buck, that's fine too. Okay, so so the distinction that is made is between the ethical model and the kind of not sort of neutral range of ethics model. Okay, really, as far as outcomes go, Plato, would say something to the effect of, like, let's say the 9/11 conspiracies that are out there, and there are many conspiracies about 9/11. I think Plato might say something to the effect of, it doesn't really look like we're ever going to really know what happened. So what we have to ask ourselves is, why are we so compelled and obsessed to continue to go after this when we'll probably never actually know the truth? And why is this driving us? Because 9/11 is forever now part of the American mythology, in terms of conspiracy theory. Kennedy gets credit for being the first one, the Kennedy assassination. That's where the illusion of the government trust begins to erode. That really starts at Kennedy up to now. Now there's, if you look at what's going on in D.C. and the gridlock and everything that's going on there's just no trust. Talk about your trust economy. There's no trust. I mean, people have just kind of given up on that whole kind of thing, I think. But then I talk to other people and I read other stuff, and I think one of the traps I personally fall into when I do this research is that I'm looking at a very small percentage of the population that really is into this stuff. And I don't think I think there are a lot of people that are into it, But given the choice of really acting on it versus just kind of keeping it in the back of their mind, they're not going to act on it. Okay. But they'll act on it in such a way as to continue to choose to perpetuate the myth. And if they've got a couple of dollars of disposable income to buy a DVD that shows a bunch of UFOs flying around, they might do it, But I don't know enough about psychology and mass psychology to really talk meaningfully about that.
I'm really interested in the 5% that has substance.
Yeah.
Go more into that.
Well, it's very simple. I mean, somebody comes up and says, I think that Tower 7 and 9/11, that was a controlled demolition. That was not caused by debris from a plane starting some fires in a couple of offices. Somebody intentionally blew up that building and made it fall down in sequence, just like a controlled demolition. And then you say, okay, what's your proof? And he says, well, I'm glad you asked. I say, first of all, let me introduce myself and my colleagues. Here's Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so. We all are structural engineers and architects and physicists. And we got together and we put our heads together on this, and we ran a bunch of computer simulations based on all the information we had and all the video records and eyewitness accounts and everything. They ran the simulations, and they're, so they've established credibility that you and I would go, so, and you work where? Oh, okay. And you're a real person, and I can email you and you'll say hello and all that kind of stuff. And there's your picture. And sure enough, that's you. So the credibility is established. Okay, and that's really compelling because that's one of the hardest things in conspiracy theory, is somebody who's credible. The second part,
a lot of people fake credibilities.
So and it's easy to find. It's just so easy to find. Or they say they have some, but they can't show it to you because they'll see me or so. I mean, it just doesn't make any freaking. It's just crazy stuff. So that top 5% though, always the credibility grabs me first. That's somebody saying, here's me, here are my credentials, I'm a real person, and I'm risking this to say that I have evidence to show that Tower 7 was a controlled demolition. Okay, so that's the ethos, right? And then the emotional aspect is minimized. There's, even though that could be potentially a very emotional thing, because 9/11 is a very emotional thing, you minimize that. You simply stick with your logic and your clear scientific explanation based on your models and your evidence and your computer simulations and everything that in their opinion, their collective opinion, those experts, that was a controlled demolition. And then they stop. That's where they stop. They don't go any further to say, now here's who did it and why.
So that's when the conspiracy starts.
Well, no, I would say no because we've already received the quote unquote official explanation of Tower 7, and those experts' research contradict the conclusions of the commission. The commission is an extension of the United States government and all those kinds of things supposedly. So it's refuting a key component of one of their explanations of what happened in 9/11, right? So that's actually really critical. So I would put that in that 5%, because then I want to see somebody who disagrees with that come forward and try to refute it, try to debunk it, or something like that. And I've never seen anybody do it for that particular article that was published that came out a couple of years ago. I have not seen anyone that, as far as I know, has been successful or even tried to debunk their conclusions.
So what about Bigfoot and things like that? So what?
Waste of time.
Waste of time.
Yeah. Bigfoot's that's like Loch Ness, and I mean that's a lot of fun, but I mean, is it possible that there are all kinds of living things on this planet above ground and in the ocean that we've never seen? Absolutely. This is a big place. We haven't explored nearly. What do they say that the oceans? We've only explored 7% of the known oceans. Yeah. I mean, there could be all kinds of really wacky, crazy animals and creatures and stuff.
I'm trying to figure out what other.
That's just not
5% categories there.
Well,
That
compelling things,
Yeah.
compelling things like that. Well, some of the other explanations for 9/11, there are a few that are definitely in the 5%. See, another conspiracy theory.
Like what?
Oh, like the Lear report that I talked about. Here's a guy who's an aeronautical engineer who had thousands of hours of flight time, flew all kinds of aircraft, worked for the military, worked for intelligence services, from a family of aeronautical engineers who knew his planes upside down, sideways, and inside out, and put his name on the affidavit, put his credentials on the affidavit. It's a legal document, so his attorneys that drew up that affidavit that he wanted to submit to the 9/11 Commission, he spent some money drawing that thing up. It went through the entire all the ways that an affidavit has to go, which is who are you first. In the affidavit, he establishes his credibility first, and I go like, okay, here you go. And then he gets into all the specifics using physics, using his aeronautical engineer knowledge and knowledge of other people that know about Boeing 737s or 757s or whatever they were. And his basic thing was those planes that you saw hitting the towers were not those stock passenger jet airplanes that somebody hijacked, because those planes they cannot physically fly at that level, at that speed, and then hit a building the way they did and not come apart the way they're supposed to. And so he's very compelling, and it was just ignored by the 9/11 Commission. They ignored it. They didn't admit it. And to me, that's a big 5%. That it's very telling that nobody really talks about it. And then other things too, but these are more like narrative accounts from people about things. The plane that crashed in Pennsylvania, people reported seeing something that looked like one of those jet fighters called the Warthog that was flying in the area, and it was unmarked, didn't have any U.S. insignia on it, but it was definitely one of those kinds of planes, and that they thought they heard it shoot down that plane. Other people said that when they got to that particular crash site, I mean, if you ever go to an airplane crash site, it's a grisly place. It's pretty gross because, human beings, you turn us inside out, it's pretty gross. The reason I know about that is one of my colleagues at work, he was one of our part-time adjunct professors, and he had worked in the Army, U.S. Army, for a long time. He's retired. And one of the things he did was airplane crash investigations for the military. And I remember asking him about this. This was after 9/11. And he said, when a plane crashes like that, and it's like at this angle, which it's reported at, and you've got 67 people inside of it, okay, all right, only a couple of things can happen. One is that you're going to have a huge fire, and that wreaks havoc on what's left. But you're still going to have human body parts. The other is that it's the kind of crash where there's not a big fireball. Well, that means you're definitely going to find stuff, And there were no human remains reported found by people who got to the crash site first. Then that got sealed off, and then later, supposedly during the last couple of days after, the people who were involved in the cover-up were bringing in stuff that was supposed to look like human remains, and they go, "Oh, look what I found," and that kind of thing. What happens, this is what Jerry told me, it was Jerry Bagnell. He said when you're crashing in a plane and there's that kind of force, all your guts in here will come out of your mouth.
Wow.
And your eyes are, I mean, it's a really huge mess. I mean, that's what happens. You see that when a plane crashes straight in like that. The plane that got shot down over Russia, over Ukraine, a couple of years ago, that Malaysian flight that had all the people from the Netherlands in it, that broke up in the middle of the air, so it kind of spun down. So when you saw the pictures of the human remains and that wreckage, they were relatively intact. But the point was, there were lots of human remains. There were people still in their seats. You know, there's all this kind of stuff. I mean, and you know, there's nothing. I don't put the accounts of Pennsylvania in the 5%, but there's an organization called Pilots for 9/11 Truth. They've been around since almost day one of 9/11, and they put their names on their. I mean, they say we're pilots, and we're real people, and here's who we are, and this is what we think happened. And we can't prove any of it. What I like about them is we can't prove this definitively, but we've got enough pieces of evidence that it sure looks like, based on our expertise, here's what we think happened on 9/11 with those planes. That's all they talk about are the planes. You know, and again, they're not saying who did it or why they did it. Okay, they're just saying that, you know, those planes were somebody. See, what was one of the accounts? Oh yeah, one of the planes leaves Boston, and on board that plane is somebody who appears to be some kind of FBI or CIA guy, and he flashes his credentials to the flight attendants and says, "I need to talk to the pilots immediately." And he goes into the pilot's area up front, and he says, "Look, I'm Agent so-and-so. We have a known terrorist on this plane right now. Here's what I need you to do. Turn it around and go back and land at this obscure airport here. We're going to deplane everybody, and we're going to get this guy, and then you'll be on your way." Okay. So the plane, now the planes have these transponders so you can track them. Okay. So the question is, why did that plane turn around? You know, what happened to the people that were taken off the plane? Anyway, they put the plane back up in the air. The plane that's been hardened, the military version of that plane, flies parallel, and the military apparently is really good at doing this. They have drones, so they have drone control over large airplanes. So they have this drone that's been hardened and militarized. This plane literally flies next to or above or below the normal plane and takes over the transponder signal. The normal plane then flies away and is gone, disappears. And now you have what you thought was that passenger plane. It's been replaced, and the transponder follows it, and it turns, and it comes back, and it hits one of the towers. Okay, and it's hardened, militarized version. That's one of their theories. The reason I find them compelling is that, you know, they're credible people. They say, this is our theory, that's all we got, we can't prove any of this other than based on these transponder records and stuff like that. They also talk about those very dramatic phone calls that people were making from cell phone technology back then was not that great, and there was a lot of speculation as to whether or not those things would even work in a plane then. You know,
Right.
Cell phones back then, I don't know if you were, how old were you? You were like, what, 3 or something? 2001? Yeah. So cell phones were like not good compared to what we have now. So there are a lot of issues with that. But there are these pieces of 9/11. The best book I've read on it was by a guy named Jim Mars. And the conclusion of his book, and it's this thick, it's this very thick book, and he has all these pieces and $250 an hour.
Yeah.
So it's been just over 2 hours. So we'll just call it even 500. Okay. This was something that one of my professors, when I was in graduate school, we were talking about. It was an issue. It's like 1996, I think, and this had come up. A researcher using this relatively new thing called the internet that people could get decided to do kind of an ethnographic approach about studying people who had physical disabilities. And it was a male professor doing his research. It wasn't like a doctoral student. It was a professor. And he went online and he created a fake profile on one of these support sites for people with physical disabilities. And he created a persona of a woman who was a paraplegic, created the whole background, all the story, life story, everything, got people to participate in his study, and he collected the narratives that they wrote to his character, believing that they were talking to a woman who was in a wheelchair, who was paraplegic, who had all these issues and all this kind of stuff, and then he published his results, and I forget, it was TPQ or something like that. Anyway, at the NCA convention, which is the big meeting for our discipline, we have all these smaller ones, but that's the big giant one. I think it was in Chicago that year. He was in a panel, and he presented his findings, and I mean, the place just blew up. And people were like, "This is just so wrong. It's so unethical." And I think he ended up apologizing for what he did. I think he got in some trouble with his university too. And then he contacted all the people and explained to them what he was trying to do and all that kind of stuff. And so that was a big marker for us in our discipline and our research, that when you do that kind of stuff, you absolutely are authentic. You are who you say you are. And if you don't do that, then there are going to be disciplinary repercussions. You can't fake it.
But for the rest of the population, or something.
Oh, they could care less. Yeah. I mean, I was looking at some of the wacky stuff, QAnon, 4chan last night, and these guys, and I'm like, who are these guys? Because I could tell they're all guys, first of all. And the other thing is, I mean, what's going on in their life right now? What's not going on in their life? Why are they again wasting time? I think
it's like a breakdown of tribes. Instead of guys hanging out with other guys, just they're online.
Or maybe it's a new kind of tribe thing. Online. An online tribe, because a guy, Donald Carbaugh, did a study, an ethnographic study in I think it was like late 80s, early 90s, where he and one of his graduate students went and lived in a really rough area of Chicago for like 2 years, and he had video crew with him, and he hung out with one of the gangs there. It was the Latin Kings, and he finally was able to be accepted by the gang, and then they allowed him to watch their various rites of passage, rituals, the way they lived their daily lives, and everything. And his takeaway was that these gangs exist and as a substitute for family. It's a replacement for a family structure that they need, that didn't exist or never existed, or it used to and it was taken away. And I think that there's this false sort of family kind of thing with the internet. It's real easy to create a persona and then construct in your mind, that you're part of this group, and I guess it could be good or therapeutic in some ways, but then when I look at what these guys are saying on 4chan and 8chan, I'm like, nah. I mean, one of these guys, one day we're gonna hear about him in the news. It's gonna be like that. All right, now I'm gonna go. All right, thanks, Adam.